Okay, here is the beginning of chapter 16. Bobby and his parents arrived a little bit later at church as his parents slept a little bit long on Sunday morning and only grabbed some coffee from a drive-thru at Benny's Donuts. The parents didn't eat, but Bobby grabbed a cream-filled donut even though he had already eaten. He did get donuts every so often, so he didn't get donuts every so often, so he took advantage of this stop. Once at church, he noticed that he didn't see Diane with Jane and Marcia and wondered if she and her parents were running a little bit late as well. It was worse than that. They found out through Diane's Sunday school teacher that Diane's grandparents were in a car accident off Lincoln Avenue and were T-boned by some high school kids out joyriding. They heard that the three boys were Jimmy Johnson, the driver, Bill Bond, and Mark Moss. All three had been in trouble before, including some jail time for some petty larceny, theft at some convenience store, but it was under $100. But the owner would not drop the charges, as he had trouble with those three before, and that time was enough. Luckily, it was found out that the boys were driving an old, small Ford Falcon Johnson had hot-rodded with a 350 engine. The grandparents were driving a large Buick Electra sedan that withstood most of the damage. The grandparents were only shaken up, but Diane and her parents were at the hospital late Saturday night and into Sunday morning, as the grandparents were kept overnight just to be sure they were okay. The real problem was that when the police arrived, they found two small suitcases with hundreds of bags of white powder and a third duffel bag full of what looked like marijuana. The crash had opened the rear two doors and had popped the trunk lid open, and the suitcase was open as well. Jimmy was booked for the driving offense and for the drugs with intent to sell, with the boys also for the drug paraphernalia found in their pockets and in the back seat and passenger seat. Partially burnt joints were found on the floor and the front floorboard of the car. Johnson, Bond, and Moss were interviewed separately so as to be able to match up their stories and somehow find out the truth about the drugs. Johnson clammed up, but Moss was a talker and was afraid of more jail time and his father, who was physically abusive and a drinker. Captain Jones of the 5th Precinct was going to interview Johnson, as he knew what they were up against with him. His father was a defense attorney in town and not very well liked by anyone. He lost as many cases as he won, but there was still money in losing. He thought he was a hard case, but Captain Jones, he was about to meet his match. Captain Jones was a retired Army Green Beret, paratrooper, special ops commander in Vietnam, and when younger, a Golden Gloves boxing champion. He was not the kind of guy you wanted to pick a fight with, no matter how big you were or thought you were. When in officer candidate school, he scored a perfect 500 on the physical combat proficiency test, 5 events of 100 points each, the only one to do it in any class in the 10 previous years of OCS classes. He walked into the interview room where Johnson was and had Lieutenant Jane Marks with him to assist. She brought in a folder with a list of the items found in the car with photos of each. Johnson slid down in his chair with his butt almost falling off the front of the seat until he saw Captain Jones walk in, and he sat up straight right away. His face was still showing that he was all attitude. "It looks like you've bitten off more than you can chew this time," began Jones. "Your buddy Moss, in the next room, he's singing like a canary," Captain Jones added. "You are lucky that the couple that you ran into are going to be okay," he stated. "Of course, you are such a hard case that you don't care about that, do you?" I'm not saying nothing till my dad gets here, said Johnson smartly. He will have me out of here in no time, he added with a smirk. I can tell you right now, said Captain Jones, you are going nowhere for a while, and maybe a long time, with the evidence collected at the accident scene. So you can cut the crap and tell us where the drugs came from, Jones stated matter-of-factly. I'm not saying anything till my dad is here, stated Johnson. He slumped back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest in defiance. Captain Jones took the folder from Lieutenant Marks and laid out all the photos in front of Johnson of the suitcases, the duffel bag, all open, and then the floor of the car, the front and back with all the burnt joints on the floor, plus the contents of all their pockets, with rolled joints still left to be smoked, and there were scenes of the traffic accident as well. How do you suppose all of this found its way into your car and trunk? Asked Captain Jones in a casual tone. Any idea? Johnson just sat there not saying a word. In walked Jimmy Johnson's dad, Daniel Johnson, and decided to take an in-your-face approach to Captain Jones. A big mistake. You have no right interrogating my son without his lawyer present, snarled Daniel Johnson. Your son was read his rights by our officers at the scene of the accident, stated Captain Jones loudly as he stood up. And I will ask him any question I like, whether you or he likes it or not, he added loudly. Now sit down and shut up, or I'm going to make this as hard as I possibly can, he nearly shouted. Daniel Johnson sat down. He knew Captain Jones was no fool, and no one to fool with, inside or outside of the station or a courtroom. Jones was afraid of no one. Daniel Jones at least knew that. Now, Jimmy, I'm going to ask you for the last time to tell me where the drugs found in your car came from. He asked again firmly. Jones sat there and looked Jimmy Johnson dead in the eye, and he did not blink. He did not say another word for a full 5 minutes, just staring down Jimmy Johnson and making him sweat it out. Jimmy said nothing, so Daniel did. Jimmy, said his dad, you had better start talking, and maybe I can help you out of this some, he stated, turning towards his son, hoping he would speak. Jimmy said nothing. Captain Jones, asked Daniel, can I have a word alone with my son for about 10 minutes? 10 minutes is all you're going to get, Jones added sternly. He and Lieutenant Marks rose. He collected the photos of the evidence and left the room. Jones turned. Don't make me wait, said Captain Jones angrily. This is the kind of activity in my town that really gets me lit. Make it quick. Daniel talked to his son and asked him about the drugs in the car, and totally forgot about the accident that could have killed 2 elderly people. Jimmy sat quietly, but then realized that with his dad so concerned that real trouble was coming his way, and Dad may not be able to do much about it this time. Dad, began Jimmy, a guy approached the 3 of us about a month ago or so, and asked us if we wanted to make some fast cash. So we did. It was only small stuff, a few dime bags here and there, and it was all fine until he came back to us with a bigger deal. But we said no dice and tried to back out of it. But with these guys, Dad, you don't get to back out, and that's what we found out, said Jimmy, who was scared about what he and his friends had gotten themselves into. Things were cool until the dumb car accident, and the cops found all the stuff in the trunk, as we should have stashed it somewhere for safekeeping for the time being, but forgot it was in the trunk, and had too much to drink last night and didn't even think about it, he added. Now, the cops have the drugs. The real dealers will be after us now, as they don't like losing any amount of money, and this is a lot of money, Jimmy concluded. Well, you are right. You are in a bad place, and Captain Jones is not one to fool with for sure. So let's try and talk about a deal with him. But it could be very dangerous for you, but may not be dangerous as a lot of prison time for drug dealing, Daniel added. Are the old people I crashed into okay? Asked Jimmy. That was bad timing for sure, he added. Yes, I found out from the front desk sergeant that they are fine, and luckily we're driving a huge car and you weren't, added Dad. You dodged a bullet on that one, said Daniel. Let's see what we can work out with Captain Jones, offered Daniel, and see where this goes. Jimmy nodded. Daniel got up from his chair and called to Captain Jones to come back into the room as they were ready. Jimmy would like to cooperate with you, added Daniel to start. He got mixed up into something, and the boys found themselves in over their heads before they knew it, he added. Okay, added Jones. You are going to do some time for this, and there's nothing that I can do about that. But if you want to help us catch the big fish, I will do what I can to get you a shorter sentence in a better prison. But you're going to have to make amends for this big time, he added. This is the kind of stuff lives are ruined over, kid. I hope you know that. He stated all this matter-of-factly. Now, Lieutenant Marks is going to record your statement and have it typed out for you to sign. I want you also to include everything you can tell us about the people you have hooked up with over these drugs, places that you met, how they got in contact with you, as we are going after them big time. Your information will help us, but your participation in setting up an exchange for a new shipment will be a start. We will be in a position to snag all involved and do our best to make it look like you are being caught as well. The story in the press today will not include the drugs we found in your car, only that we found you smoking some weed prior to the accident, stated Captain Jones. We will give you the empty suitcases and the duffel bag back, and our people will find out what the street value of all that is, and we will get that amount of money together for you to make a cash drop for Mr. Big. And you will get some new drugs. Will that work for you? Asked Jones. Yes, sir, it will, replied Jimmy. You'll be with us the whole way? Asked Jimmy, now getting somewhat nervous about all of this. Yes, but you should have thought about this all before you got involved with these guys, said Jones. Being sorry after the fact only helps so much. You got yourself in deep this time. We know, said Daniel, fearful about what was to lie ahead. This is not going to be easy, Jimmy, but this is the right thing to do, Dad added. Okay, are you in agreement to go ahead with this? Asked Captain Jones. Jimmy nodded and said, yes. Captain Jones left Lieutenant Marks to work on the statement and went back to his office to get another officer to go in and sit with Marks. He wanted 2 officers in the room at all times, just to be able to corroborate the story in case Jimmy decided to back out. That would be the least of their problems. Captain Jones called the hospital and made sure that the Davis involved in the accident were okay and got their home phone number and address. He took a ride over to their house as he wanted them to know that he and the city cared about them and was not letting this incident just go away. Bobby saw the Davis family next door get home about 8 p.m. that night and went right over to find out if everything was okay. Diane and her parents filled Bobby in on the accident and that the folks were staying overnight, but that they were fine, just a little shook up. Luckily, the boys in the other car were not going crazy fast, and there was little damage to their big Buick. The boys' car did not fare so well. The nightly news talked about the crash on Lincoln and that the accident victims were doing well, but nothing was mentioned about the minor boys or anything about what was found in the car. That was a good thing for the police department and what they were about to try and do. Bobby got up to leave and said he was glad the grandparents were okay and he would see Diane in school tomorrow. It was a sigh of relief for everyone, except for the boys in the other car. Their day of reckoning was coming. And we continue. Monday morning at the police department, there was a news conference to talk briefly about the accident on Sunday morning and how grateful everyone was that there were no injuries to report. Yet the three suspects from the car causing the accident were being held with no bail for 72 hours. Because they were minors, their names were being withheld for the time being. At the opening of the AM shift, Captain Jones addressed the officers. I want to personally thank all of the responding officers for their quick response to the accident on Lincoln Avenue early Sunday morning. I also want to thank Rookie Officer Javier Molina for his quick response to call dispatch and their quick efforts to get a search warrant for the cars involved in the accident. We also want to thank the DA's office for getting the warrant so quickly. Even though the driver's car that caused the accident was very damaged and the trunk, front hood, and the two rear doors were rendered open, we did not search the vehicle until we had the warrants in hand. Captain Jones continued, I also want to say that the participants in the crash, all three juveniles, are cooperating with us to determine why the crash happened and what the appropriate charges should be. We will have another press conference on Wednesday morning and fill everyone in at that time. I also want to state that I don't want anyone speaking to the press about this accident or the names of the juveniles released until we are ready to do so. I want all of this information to remain quiet until I release any information pertaining to this case. I want this clearly understood by all, and the DA's office is in full agreement. He asked, is there anything else before everyone heads out on their shift? If not, have a great day and be safe. With all that said, everyone headed out, as the Chief and Lieutenant Marks were headed over to the DA's office for a meeting. Now they had some extensive planning to do with the DA's office and the Fed's DEA field office in Chicago. That meeting was for 10 a.m. The mayor was filled in about 9 a.m. by Captain Jones and Lieutenant Marks, as they were about to leave right now after the precinct briefing. Their hope was that they could keep all that had transpired under wraps so they could get to the bottom of some major drug activity in their town. They did not need any leaks in the next week plus. This would be a big operation to pull off. At the meeting with the mayor, Captain Jones asked for only the mayor himself to be in the meeting, as the less people who knew anything would be for the better. The mayor agreed. Captain Jones filled in the mayor on all the details of what they wanted to do with the three juveniles involved, and all three agreed to be a part of a sting operation with whoever got them involved in this major drug trade. Jones told the mayor that the DEA was going to fully cooperate with the city's police force and would come up with an entrapment plan with an exchange of $30,000 in cash for the drugs found in Jimmy Johnson's car trunk, and hopefully get the dealers to supply them with another lot of drugs to keep their business going, and ultimately catch them in the act of distribution with intent to sell, and put an end to this once and for all, if that could ever happen. Jones told the mayor that the DEA would be putting up the cash and would be fully involved in all aspects of the drop site surveillance operation and ready to move in once the exchange was made with Jimmy and his accomplices. The mayor fully understood and why secrecy was so important at this point. No leaks to the press must not happen for this to work. The mayor thanked the chief and just asked to be kept informed only on a need-to-know basis. Captain Jones thanked the mayor, and he and Lieutenant Marks headed to the DA's office. The meeting with the DEA out of Chicago went well, as they were all ready and had the possible leads on who was running the traffic out west of Chicago. There were also possible links to Miami and San Diego. If this operation worked, everyone in the DEA knew this could put a big dent in their entire operation on the east and west coast. Any place that was a port city was a possible entry point for drugs into the U.S. The plan was mapped out that Jimmy and his buddies would work up to meet up where they received their first shipment of cocaine and hash, but all they could do would be to show up and wait to see if their dealer would be there, and they would be keeping a set of eyes on them all the time. The dealer surely knew of the accident Sunday morning by now and might be getting nervous about their product. The plan was to have the boys drive out to the site around noon on Wednesday and just wait and see if anyone would show up. They originally met down by the track south of the overpass on Baker Street. There was an abandoned railroad warehouse and huge parking lot. The building was U-shaped, and they met inside the U so as not to be seen. The DEA agents would all be on the ground floor all around the U-shape, and the city police would be holed up in an adjacent building that was smaller but had a double garage door so they could all have their cars inside the building. Inside the U-shaped building there were also huge garage doors for receiving truck shipments, and the DEA would have plenty of tactical Hummers ready to make a move. Everyone would be fully armed, locked and loaded, but hoped it never came to that. There was also video surveillance set up at every possible entry point to the area, so they could see any and all traffic that could be part of the drug smugglers' group. Maps were handed out to all involved, and the police and the DEA would set up in the buildings at midnight on Tuesday night and lay low until the operation began Wednesday. The three boys were released to Daniel Johnson, and the boys were to stay at his house on Tuesday night and be ready to move on Wednesday at 11 a.m. to the drop site. The police had provided a replacement older Chevy for them to use, and the same bags that were found in Jimmy's Falcon were given back, empty of course, to put in the trunk of the Chevy. One of them was full of $30,000 in cash. The boys and Jimmy's dad were nervous, but they knew they could not show it on Wednesday. They had to act cool and composed for this to work. Wednesday morning came and everybody was ready. Then the boys arrived at the warehouse on time and waited, but no one came, and by 2 p.m. they were given radio instructions to head back home where Lieutenant Marks was staying with them. It was hard to guess what was going on, but maybe the dealers were just being careful and had their eyes on the drop site as well. Chief Jones decided that everyone needed to stay in place overnight, and they would do it again on Thursday morning. The boys arrived at the drop site again on Thursday at 11 and just waited, and by 1 p.m. were wondering if this was going to happen at all. Just then, 2 black Cadillacs pulled up about 25 feet behind their Chevy. 4 big enforcers opened the rear doors of the black cars and just stood by the doors and looked over the landscape of the area. 5 minutes later, the drivers of both cars got out and stood by their doors. The enforcers opened the trunks of their cars and pulled out AR-15s and chambered rounds in their weapons. This did not look good. In the front car, a man got out of the passenger side door. He was dressed in a black suit with an open gray collar shirt and walked slowly up to the rear of the Chevy. "I was getting a little worried about you boys," he began. "I heard about your little accident on Sunday morning and wondered if you had lost all my merchandise," he added. "We saw the cops take your suitcases and the duffel bag, and we're a little concerned about you." Jimmy spoke. "No need to worry, as we had already sold all the merchandise and just kept the empty cases in the car. No harm, no foul," he added. "The cops thought they had us, but no dice," said Jimmy with a smile. "Well, that's good, as it would have not worked out well for you for the cops to have my product, you know." Jimmy moved around to the trunk, opened it, and pulled out the suitcase filled with the $30,000 in cash and showed it to Mr. Big. "How much is in the case?" he asked. "$30K," said Jimmy. "I hope that is sufficient for us to keep doing business," he added. "That is just fine, boys," said Mr. Big. "I didn't know what to think about you boys, but I guess this arrangement is going to work out for both of us." Mr. Big took the suitcase and took out 3 stacks of $1,000 each and handed it to the 3 boys. "Here's a little tip for each of you for being honest with me," he added. "I think we can keep this arrangement going for a while," he added. He turned to one of the guys in the rear car, who opened the trunk and pulled out 2 more suitcases, just like the ones the boy had, plus 2 duffel bags full of hash, one more than the last time. "Here's a little extra for you to work with this time," he added. "Hand me the other empty suitcase and duffel bag, will you?" he instructed, and Jimmy did as he was asked. Jimmy put it all in the trunk and closed it. The other boys got in the back seat and closed the doors, and Jimmy and Mr. Big shook hands. With that, Mr. Big grabbed him around the neck and started choking him real hard. "I hope you understand that this is business, and we are not friends. So it would not be good for you to double-cross me at any time. Do you understand me?" "Yes," said Jimmy, in a squeaky voice from being choked, as he kept tapping Mr. Big's arm, hoping he would let go of him. He did. Jimmy jumped back and started rubbing his neck. The police and the DEA had been smart not to react when all this was going on, and just stayed in the position. "Now," said Mr. Big, "you guys get out of here," and threw Jimmy a throwaway cell phone and said, "I will call you next time we need to meet, got it?" he stated. "Don't show up here again until I tell you to." "Okay," said Jimmy, and he got into his car and started to drive away. Once the boys were about 200 yards from the drug dealers, the DEA moved in, and their police vehicles encircled the dealers and their cars. There were so many vehicles and officers surrounding the dealers, they knew they had no chance, and dropped their weapons and just stood by the cars. They found other handguns inside the suit coats and holsters and had confiscated them as well. They were all handcuffed and put in DEA vans that were outside the perimeter just waiting for the word. DEA agents got into the Cadillacs and drove off to the police station, as did everyone else. Captain Jones couldn't believe that all this went down without a single shot being fired. No one would believe it if he told them. He knew they were lucky this time, as this was not how this usually works. Bill Markham of the DEA thanked everyone for their help, and they would take care of dealing with all the paperwork and the arrests. They took back their suitcase of $27,000, and when the boys arrived at the station, gave back their $3K, so all was well with the money recovered, and all the drugs were locked up in the evidence room at the station. The transfer paperwork with all the drugs was complete by Captain Jones and Bill Markham of the DEA, and they took custody of that as well. All's well that ends well, said Jones to Markham. Nice to work with you and your team, said Markham. This went better than I could have ever hoped, he added as they shook hands. The DEA folks headed out. Captain Jones called the mayor and filled him in on how smoothly everything worked out, and he was quite pleased about that. Nice and quiet was how the mayor liked his town. Now all that was left was to deal with the three boys and what their charges could and should be. Captain Jones met with the DA, and they decided to let the boys get off with Jimmy getting a reckless driving charge and all of 200 hours of community service work. Daniel Johnson said he would make sure all the boys complied with that sentence. All three of the boys knew they were lucky, no blessed, that this all turned out to be not 10 plus years in jail. That was a possibility they had just averted for sure. Daniel also said he would pay for the Davises' car repair and help them anywhere he could if they would not press charges against Jimmy. The next day, Daniel Johnson called Chief Jones and called him all was well with the Davis family and how much he appreciated what Jones did for the boys. That was not a trivial thing. All I can say is, said Jones, I hope they stay out of trouble, as the next time will be jail time. I can promise you that, he added sternly. I know, said Daniel, but I still appreciate all your help in all of this. I think this scare will keep the boys on the straight and narrow from now on, he added, and said his goodbyes. Captain Jones hung up the phone and just looked at it. I hope he is right, he said to himself. I hope he is right. With that, Captain Jones turned out the light in his office and was headed home to get some much-deserved sleep. He told the desk sergeant he could call him at home, but make sure it was important. The desk sergeant agreed and wished him well. Good night, sir, he added. Well, I guess I mean good day. Jones headed out the front door and looked up at the clear blue sky. It was a good day, after all.